In today's video, we're going to be taking a look here at Hurricane Lee. As always, we do have Tropical Storm and eventually Hurricane Margo as well going on. There is some new disturbances that we're going to be tracking in the Atlantic as well, so we'll be taking a look at those. We'll also dive into the upcoming pattern like we always do, but as a bonus, later on we're going to be taking a look at the monthly outlook from the CFS V2 model and taking a look at why I think we have some good news, at least for cold and snow lovers, as to why this winter could be especially cold. In the developments of what November and December look like in particular, there is some growing signs of some extra potent ice building up there in the Arctic. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit, but before we do, be sure to check out Prestige Weather in the description and pin comment down below. It's only $5 a month. We have been growing so rapidly over there, and I cannot thank you guys enough. We do early access to our monthly and seasonal outlooks, where we do have our snowfall forecast available right now, as well as our first freeze forecast. So you guys can check that out today. We also do weekly consulting calls with you guys, where we literally call you on the phone, and we also do other consulting services within there. So be sure to check it out, again, in the pinned comment and description down below. Let's just dive into things, and first things first, we're taking a look at Hurricane Lee. Now, to be honest with you, again, this cone forecast is very far to the east. I talked about yesterday how Bermuda looks more at risk than the East Coast. We have seen some models, especially from the GFS ensemble model. So that's a group of models taken from the GFS family of models, the American model it's sometimes referred to as. And we've seen some of those members show a particularly concerning solution at some chance at an East Coast impact, or at least a very close miss. So we are going to watch that very, very closely. But as of now, at least from the updates we're getting from the National Hurricane Center here, we still do expect this pretty far out to sea track. And that is what we can keep our fingers crossed for overall. This is a very major hurricane at 110 miles per hour. This is expected to remain at major hurricane status at least until the day on Wednesday into Thursday, where at some point it's going to lower below Category 3 is the expectation, down to a Category 2 or so. 2 or 1 is kind of what we expect here for Thursday and Friday here, where it would potentially be, if it was on the very far eastern side of things, getting pretty darn close there to Bermuda. Now, if it's on the very far western side of things, we can see that this does put the East Coast at a little bit of a risk. So I don't think that the National Hurricane Center is completely closed off to this idea either. We're going to be watching it closely with you guys. I still think there's a lot of question marks here, and we're going to need to update everybody on this every single day, which is good because we do upload every single day. So there will be updates frequently. As we take a look here at Tropical Storm Margo, and again, eventually Hurricane Margo by the time we're taking a look at Tuesday, it's expected to kind of just remain on this very far northern trajectory, just straight to the north. And it's just going to stay that way, eventually upgrading to hurricane status around Tuesday timeframe, perhaps Tuesday morning, and then staying that way through the late week. But again, there's really no land out here, so the implications are quite minimal at this point. As we take a look at the overall tropics, we do see where Hurricane Lee is located. We also see where Tropical Storm Margo is located. But now we have two yellow bubbles out here in our MDR, and that is short for Main Development Region, which is the area in between the Caribbean there and Africa. This is where we see a lot of our tropical systems develop and start. And these are very, very in par with what we do typically see. We can see they're coming from that area in Africa, heading westward, and we are going to watch them very, very closely. So we have one here where we have a 30% chance of development over the next 2 days, and still a 30% chance over the next 7 days. So we're going to be watching this really, really closely. Again, still a relatively low risk. We do see this as a yellow. So there's yellow, orange, and red. And usually they start out as yellow and eventually potentially upgrade into orange or even red. So we are going to watch these daily as well. We have this one over here where there's a 0% chance over the next 48 hours because it's still very close to Africa. But once it moves into this bubble area, which will be kind of through the next 7 days, it does upgrade there to a 30% chance of development. I think the only good news here that we have is we do see a pretty sharp curve there to the north, and this would put really any land at a pretty minimal risk of impact. But I don't want to just say that too early. There is still the chance that this goes very far south compared to what's expected, and if that was the case, then we could be taking a look at a little bit more of a concerning system here. Now, with the tropics aside, let's just dive into the upcoming pattern. We can see that by later this evening, which is Sunday, September 10th, a lot of NFL games going on today, so I'm sure a lot of you are excited about that. We can see up and down the East Coast here, all the way from Florida up to Maine. We do see a lot of thunderstorm activity taking place, and this is going to be hit or miss depending on where you're at. I expect a lot of isolated and scattered thunderstorms to be taking place in some clusters around the East Coast area here. We can see that there's a second area here for the upper Midwest and Great Lakes, back down through all the way through the Rockies into the Southwest here. A lot of the plains dealing with this as well. I would say the heaviest area here is for South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas, as you can see, where we have some darker greens going on, perhaps some more persistent activity in there. Let's just take a look at tomorrow on Monday, September 11th. And as you can see, the East Coast does still have some isolated activity, although it's looking a little bit more minimal than what we saw before. Just for the past few days, so Saturday into today on Sunday. And then we can see for the Rockies, especially the four corner states there, all the way through the plains into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes, we do have a little bit more activity than even we saw before. This is going to be our next line of thunderstorms that are rolling through. These will continue to make their way eastward and bring impacts to many different states along the way. By the time we reach Tuesday, September 12th here, you can see that, again, there's not an organized area of low pressure, but there is some broad low pressure is what I would call it, and then we have a cold front extending down underneath. So we do expect this big cool down, and this is going to be associated with that. So cold air moving through, thunderstorms along that line. It's pretty classic stuff for this time of year. The springtime and the fall time is when you see a lot of this, and sure enough, we are seeing it here. By the time we reach Wednesday afternoon, we can see things are really reaching the eastern seaboard. Low pressure system here, cold front extending underneath just like this. We will see more cooler air moving through and thunderstorms along that line still just further to the south and further to the east at this point. We see our Hurricane Lee here as well to the north of Dominican Republic and Haiti there, and we are going to see what this model does with it, but it is going to probably be out to sea here like we've mentioned. The heaviest areas on this particular frame, I would say, is in between Texas and Oklahoma there, where there's some pretty potent thunderstorm activity. And same story for some of the mid-Atlantic coast up through a lot of the Northeast and New England in general. So for New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, I would say that's an area I'm watching especially closely for some heavier activity in there. Now, by the time we reach Thursday, September 14th, we can see a lot of this has now moved off the East Coast. And we do see some still here for Eastern Canada. And then still some activity in there for Texas and Oklahoma. But in general, a little bit of a quieter day here than the ones prior. By the time we're reaching Friday, September 15th here, we can see that the Gulf Coast is now dealing with a lot of this activity. I would say if you take it from the plains and the Rockies southward through a lot of the southeast and deeper south, this is in general the area that we're watching mostly for on Friday for some thunderstorm activity. A lot of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas there dealing with these thunderstorms. Same story up there for Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming as well, even into Nebraska, as you can see. Definitely some little bit of pockets of some heavier thunderstorms happening is what I'd call it. Saturday the 16th here, we do see that there is some thunderstorm activity still around for the Rockies and Plains, but as you take a look at the west and the east, a little bit quieter. Hurricane Lee is well offshore, which is exactly what we're hoping for, of course. Let's just take this towards Sunday, and again, another quiet day here. We do see some activity moving down from Canada into the Great Lakes. We do see areas in Texas and Mexico also dealing with some of these thunderstorms around for the late weekend. Monday, September 18th here, just taking a look, we do have some thunderstorm activity, especially there in Minnesota. It's a pretty small area. And then for some of the very far northern areas there in the Northeast, I'd say is the main pockets to be watching for. So we do see just a quieter pattern overall begin to take over. And then for Tuesday, September 19th here, we see some of the deeper southeast areas all the way up through into the Midwest. There is a couple of pockets of thunderstorms, but once again, I mean, I think probably that was 3 or 4 days in a row of pretty minimal activity. So perhaps for the mid to late portion here of September, we can be expecting in general some quieter times ahead. And as a result of this, when we take a look at the total precipitation, I mean, we see some above average activity here for the mid-Atlantic into the Northeast, some here maybe for the Great Lakes and upper Midwest, as well as some of the northern plains. And then here for a lot of the four corner states into Texas and Oklahoma. We saw pretty persistent activity in here that lasted multiple days. And that is probably why we're seeing some of the reds and browns in there, which is going to be about 2 to 6 inches of precipitation over the next 10 days, which is quite substantial. Now, if you're curious about what to expect in your area, I'm not going to go over it because today is going to be a little bit longer. But here is the color table down below with the amount of inches you can expect for your particular area, so you can find where you're at, what color is there, and then find it here on this chart down below. Now, as we reach the temperature pattern, We can see we're already dealing with some cooler conditions, mostly lower 80s, upper 70s for a lot of folks. There is some yellows around here in the east, and the reason being is we have not seen a full development here of this positive PNA yet, which we do expect to happen eventually. PNA standing for Pacific North American Oscillation, and I've been talking about this a little bit more recently, and this has been something that we've used for years now on the channel, and it has been a nearly perfect indicator of what to expect over the lower 48 here as far as temperature patterns. A very, very accurate indicator, and I love to use it for that reason. We do see that this positive PNA develops eventually here. So we see these kind of reds along the west coast here, indicative of this positive PNA really, really developing. And right as it happens, you see the cold air diving southward very quickly into the east. So for later this week, especially around the 15th time frame, we can expect some pretty crisp fall air to be moving in. It is going to be September 15th, but it will feel like a lot more like late October is kind of the temperatures I expect. So perhaps upper 70s, lower 70s, upper 60s for a lot of folks is what I would say. As we continue on, you see that this kind of gets averaged out, but that's typical of an ensemble model just like this one. This is our European ensemble model. We have about 20 different models here, all putting together the forecast, and it takes the mean average of all of those. So over time, they start to disagree more and more, and you begin to see it kind of averaging out is what I always call it. So we see some lighter colors going on, a little bit less bold with the prediction here. You can expect perhaps some cooler air in here, or it could be a warmer pattern. I do see some blues along the west, which maybe is a switching up of this PNA pattern that we were talking about earlier. That is also something that we could be seeing here. As we continue on, we do see a full-blown flip in the pattern for late September, so this is something that I'm now watching for. It looks a lot more like a negative PNA to me, which does the opposite. It surges this warmth into the east, and we see it happening on screen here. A perfect example of that right there. Now, as I promised in the beginning of the video, let's take a look at the long-range pattern. Here's September overall, according to this CFS model. We see cooler temperatures in the east overall, with warmer temperatures for the most part along this western region. Again, positive PNA pattern. This forces a lot of the cold air that would be in Canada down into the eastern United States. So that's the September pattern. We want to be watching this Arctic area here because this is where you need to see ice and snow developing in this time of year in order for later on, like December, January, February, for that Arctic air to really take hold and be able to move down into the United States. Because right now we see a lot of warmth up here, which is kind of a cause for some concern, again, for those people hoping for some snowfall this year. It's not necessary, but it would be helpful. As we take a look at October, we see a continuation kind of that type of pattern. Some warmer areas, maybe some cooler areas here in the very far northeastern areas of Canada into Greenland, which is equally a very important area for that ice to be developing this time of year. We do see overall cooler temperatures in the east. Again, more of a positive PNA look out west. That is what we're taking a look at. As we keep going, November here, we see a complete flip. So we see cooler temperatures along the west. This is going to be clearly a negative PNA, and we see the warmth surging in. So again, almost a perfect indicator of what to expect here in the United States. It works almost every single time. And we're seeing a continuation of this warmth on the western end of the Arctic here. And then on the eastern end, we're seeing a lot more cooler temperatures. Very interesting. And then as we reach December, I think this is when things get a little bit more promising. We see more cold developing overall for the Arctic areas, and December won't be too late, okay? So if we start to see a lot of ice and snow developing up here in December, that could still set up for a pretty chilly January, February, March timeframe. So this is when things start to look a lot more promising for me. We do see some cooler temperatures around for a lot of the east where most of our viewers are at. Also Texas and the deeper south down here. I know a lot of you are just hoping for cooler anything at this point after the summer you guys had. And it's a little bit unclear what this PNA would look like. You see some oranges, you see some blues. I'm sure it's not actually going to look exactly this way. We do also have multiple members at play with the CFS model as well. I think it might be 4. So it is possible for there to be some averaging out happening here. Not quite as bad as what you would see on like the European ensemble model, but still we could see some of that going on here. So we're going to continue to pay attention to this long range pattern with you guys. I want to show it about once a week or so, and we'll be going over it. Let me know in the comments what your guys' thoughts are, but be sure to subscribe as we do upload every single day for you guys. We'll be going over the hurricanes, keeping track of that, of course, the upcoming pattern, and again, weekly with these long range outlooks. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.